To the above, there is one caveat, and that is the aspect of timing. The immediacy, or the lack thereof, of God's response, which was the content embedded in Moshe's challenge to God, V'amru li ma shmo, a challenge that the Rebbe reads into the text. Why did God stand by and permit such horrendous acts to be perpetrated against his people? Or in a more modern context, where was God? And as we noted earlier, Moshe himself demanded an answer. Ma omar aleihim, the Jews will ask, and I need to be able to have a response for them. And that response was that Zeh Shmi Le'olam, a missing vav, that I, God, even when things appear to be negative and people are in the depths of despair, I am still the God of Rachamim, but for reasons only known to myself. The God of Rachamim needs to be concealed temporarily from the world. This does not mean, God says, that I am disconnected from the world, but v'zeh zichri l'dor dor, I'm accessible. And as Rashi's interpretation to this phrase, God taught Moshe how to communicate with a God who is otherwise concealed. If one were to ask, where is the rachamim, the mercy in all this suffering, the answer comes in understanding the caveat that there is a short-term and a long-term timeline. On the short term, there is suffering, sometimes extreme suffering, involving dislocation, forced emigration, and sometimes even death to our beloved ones. But this suffering, unfortunately, is a necessary prerequisite for the good that was to follow. The model comes to us from the incident involving YOSSEF. Footnote 39 points us to Vayigash 45, where YOSSEF, after revealing his identity to his brothers, became quite philosophical about his personal suffering. He could have been spiteful for the pain and suffering that his brothers had administered to him, but instead he tells them, Al te'atzavu, do not be upset, V'al yichar be'einechem, do not be angry with yourselves, in that ki mechartem oti heina, that you sold me to this place Egypt. Because while your personal agendas were to afflict harm, you were in effect implementing a broader master plan from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that plan was, L'michya shalchani Elokim lifnechem. God had sent me, lifnechem, ahead of you, l'michya, to save your lives, that you not die in the famine. And then again, 2 pasukim later, V'yishlacheni Elokim lifnechem. God sent me ahead of you, lasum lachem she'erit, to ensure your survival ba'aretz, in the land, ulahachiyot, and to sustain you and your families and the flocks, lifleita gdola, for that great salvation they will require due to their substantial size. So we have here a short-term and a long-term situation. In the short term, there was immense suffering and angst to Yosef in being forced into a personal galut by the brothers, thrown into prison, and the many attendant challenges that he faced. The long-term view, that one can only appreciate in hindsight, was that he had to endure the suffering for the greater good of his immediate family. And as the Rebbe points out in footnote 39, this process took well nigh 22 years for the overall plan to unfold. And then as we move into Sefer Shmot, we come to realize that the incident involving Yosef was one part of a greater script that was unfolding, one that Yosef may or may not have recognized as being God's master plan that he was to play in the fulfillment of the Brit Ben HaBetarim, promises that were made to Avraham, where God informs Avraham that his descendants will evolve into a great nation. However, before that happens, his descendants were to be gerim, strangers, in a land that does not belong to them, in that state of galut. Va'avadum v'inu otam, they will enslave them, they will afflict them, there will be great suffering, and this period will last for 400 years. A period that began with Yosef's arrival in Egypt as a slave, facilitated by the machinations of his siblings. And only then, Yetzu b'rechush gadol, they will be in a position to leave the land with great wealth, physically or spiritually, and the beginnings of a new era leading up to Matan Torah. Why God works things in this format is beyond human comprehension and forms part of the belief fabric of Yahadut, that we have a God of Rachamim, that Rahmanut is very often not apparent. It is concealed to those in need of Rahmanut. Sometimes the response is immediate, sometimes not. But we, within Orthodox Judaism, retain the faith in a master plan of God's Rachamim that unfortunately requires a degree of suffering. This worldview underpins the subject of Historia, an interpretation of the ups and downs that have faced the body corporate of Bnei Yisrael over the past 2,000 or so